Evening, folks. Well, I was just sitting here welding some metal, eating some of these goat chops, listening to Primus. I just couldn't help but wonder, whatever happened to Lee Van Cleef? Whatever happened to Lee? Anyway, what I really wanted to address is some stuff I've seen people posting online. And of course, we're all in quarantine, and the big scary Chinese virus is making its rounds. And it's a serious situation. I'm not going to try and downplay that. But some of the stuff that people are saying we should do, some steps that we should take in regards to this problem that we're facing is troublesome. And particularly what I'm talking about is the widespread appeal to socialism that I think has kind of gained a bit more traction in the past few weeks because of what we're dealing with. People saying, oh, this is what happens when you don't have universal health care. We need universal health care. We need government to put money in people's pockets and this and that and that. And there's a few things I want to address about this because this is a long-term issue that these solutions would cause. And this isn't just, oh, this guy's scared of socialism. Look at him in his hat and his redneck attitude or whatever. He just doesn't like anything that's different than what he's used to. And that's not the case. All right, I'm fairly well read on economics and philosophy and politics. I actually majored in politics and at like a university, so I've read a lot of books on it, which is kind of a difference between me and what a lot of people who are opining about socialism online, in the midst of this crisis, there's a bit of a difference to it. All right, and not me saying that I'm right just because I went to school for it, of course not, but what I am saying is that I've studied these topics a lot more than your average, shit poster, as it were. So I guess first I'll address this whole we need to make healthcare a right thing. And calling something a right does not make it a right. And the thing about healthcare is obviously it's essential to life. It's an important good and service that people need. And that's what it is. It is a good and a service. It involves material items that need to be manufactured and transported and procured by medical facilities that need to be built and maintained, and they need to be administered by people who paid a lot of money and spent a lot of time going to school to learn how to implement all those materials. So it's a good and it's a service, like food, okay? And the reason that these things cannot be rights is because they specifically involve the labor and property of other people. Okay, and nothing can be a right if it involves somebody else's labor, because that would be involuntary servitude. I think that should be pretty clear to most people. That simply making it a right does not make these medical implements. It doesn't make food appear. Okay, the countries all over the world where healthcare is a universal right, and they really have pretty terrible medical infrastructures. And the way in order to do this is to take a lot of the regulations away, because everybody's always crying about big pharma is holding us back and they're in bed with the government and stuff like that. It is true that big business does to a certain extent like big government. Why they like it is because government will implement regulations on the certain industry, whether it's medicine or insurance or something like that. The government passes these regulations that only the large, already well-established companies can meet. So what that does, it stifles competition, and when competition is stifled and there's only a few sources for medical equipment or stuff like that, then, they're the only game in town. That drives the price up artificially. So what we need to do is get the government out of it a little bit more, deregulate some of this stuff, and then you can have more companies. This would, even with like private insurance, like look how easy it is to get auto insurance, whereas healthcare is like a nightmare. Okay, it's because there's more competition in the auto insurance industry, where companies are in competition with each other. They're trying to get clients, so they lower the price to make it appeal to more people. But it's not so with the medical companies, because it's such a highly regulated industry, probably one of the most highly regulated industries, that only the companies that were already well established can meet those regulations. So it stifles competition in the market, and it drives up price. And obviously, that's like kind of a government engineered issue. And then everybody wants to turn to the government and say, "Oh, we need you to come rescue us in this situation that you engineered." So this is a big issue with the government interfering with all these industries. Is that they interfere in these industries, overregulate them, stifle competition, drives up the price artificially, and then after the fact, they try and come in like the heroes and regulate it even more, as if that's going to solve anything. It's never worked. Okay. So, the deeper conversation about rights, we have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And in John Locke's original writings, it was property, procurement of property. And pretty much what all these boil down to is negative rights, what's referred to as negative rights. And, why do we got to be so negative all the time? Why can't we be a little more positive? All right, it's just a term. And the reason it's called a negative right is because it does not involve the guarantee of goods or services that need to be provided by other people's work and property in order to give to you. So a negative right is a different way to put it is freedom from rather than freedom to. Liberty, what's liberty? It's a freedom from imprisonment. It's a freedom of mobility, freedom from other people impeding you. That's what it was understood to be. Literally the freedom to walk around and be unshackled. Okay? The life, the right to life. That is, people don't have the right to take your life. And so they're more knots rather than like guarantees of material goods or services. And that's why healthcare, whatever you call it, however you want to label it, it cannot and never will be a right. And like, as if the U.S. is the only country that's suffering because of this crisis. Italy got hit pretty hard. Italy's like a fairly socialistic sort of country. They have the healthcare. They're like in the whole Eurozone of, goodness to their citizens or whatever you want to call it. So to act like only the United States is being affected by this, and it is specifically because we don't have universal healthcare, it's ridiculous. And so what should we talk about next? People getting riled about racism. It's racist that I saw somebody post it. It's American apathy, and granted, it's gotten a little more serious in the past couple of weeks. People are taking it more seriously now that the apathy was. But originally, I saw somebody post that American apathy towards this whole virus outbreak, saying like, "Oh, we're going to be all right." That signified racism because it implied that Americans somehow have stronger or better immune systems than Chinese people. So, a weak little Chinese virus isn't going to do anything to the big sturdy Americans. I don't know who actually thinks that. But anyway, somebody included in that post that, this, American exceptionalism, thinking that we're better than everybody, so we're not going to get that sick. And American exceptionalism, it's meant a few different things over the years, but there's a book by Charles Murray about American exceptionalism. Go read the book before you just use this term to mean whatever you want, okay? And what it originally meant during the Revolutionary period was that America, because of the Revolution, because of those principles that we founded our country on, we were the exception to the rule. Because back in that day, the rule was there's the king and you do what the king says. And we were an exception to that because we did not follow in the footsteps of these other countries, the way they set themselves up. And that's why we were exceptional, an exception to the rule. And then people have used this term over the years to try and make it mean that we're superior, which if you read the book by Charles Murray, he says that originally that's not the intent, that's not the meaning of that term, American exceptionalism. And he points out also that a lot of Europeans used that term because they saw the United States as an exception to that rule because of our experiment in self-government and individual liberties and pursuit of happiness. That's why we're the exception to the rule. It's not because we always just thought we were better than everybody and that it was this sort of misguided nationalism. So it was a good read, actually. So definitely look into that book and instead of just throwing this term around as if it always was intended to mean something racist or whatnot. Like these people, even the plague doesn't simmer these people down with the whole race card. And in addition to our country being the exception to the rule, you hear a lot of talk, people like what it means to be an American. We hear that, and we hear people saying about other people like, "Well, you're what's wrong with this country, or this is what's wrong with the country." But I think in a big way, along this line of thinking, that we were an exception to the rule, and that because of that, we did have a unique role to play in the world. And the reason we're not the exception to the rule anymore is because people followed our lead into self government, into the Republican style of government, and that is the main reason why we're not considered the exception to the rule anymore, because we made the new rule. Okay, and in a lot of ways, we as Americans were called to a higher standard to to um, to live differently as free people, and not as servants or slaves or peasants. And I think that's a big part of the issue that we have with our country, is that a lot more people see being American as simply like their nationality or their citizenship, their place of birth. Whereas I think in a lot of ways it was meant to mean a little bit more, that you understand these principles, that you hold to these truths that are self evident. And a lot of people just don't have that, and I don't think there's really much of a way to recover that. And I'm sure people would get upset about it, like, oh well, I didn't ask to be born here. I didn't ask to be saddled with this responsibility of being a higher moral person, or holding to a higher standard. I didn't ask to be saddled with that. Well, if we didn't change the rule for other countries to follow, then you would have been saddled with the responsibility of following some backward state religion, or by worshiping some dictator as a god. You would have been saddled with that responsibility otherwise. Or maybe you would have been saddled with the responsibility of having to walk 5 miles for water and food and wood every day. Like, would you rather be saddled with that responsibility rather than being saddled with the responsibility of understanding the rights you have as a human being, and using those to live to your full potential? It's ridiculous. And back to the negative rights thing, I had another thought on that to maybe describe it a little bit better. What's the difference between these two phrases I'm about to say? I have the right to marry. I have the right to a wife. What's the difference between those two? Well, it's the one is a negative right, and the second one is a positive right. And when I say I have the right to marry, that means that the government or otherwise does not have the right to prevent me from doing so. Whereas if I say I have the right to a wife, that means that somebody needs to lasso up some poor gal and make her marry me. And obviously, I think it's self-evident that you could see the issues with that. So I think that's a pretty good example of the difference between those two. All right, and then lastly, we're going to talk about some of these sappy ass posts that I've seen about life under quarantine, and oh, when this struggle is all over, we're going to come out stronger and more caring, and all this and that and that. All right, again, I'm not going to say that this is not a difficult situation, because it obviously is for pretty much everybody. Okay, and I've already tried to address the fact that it's foolish to try and embrace socialism because of this, but the fact that you can hop online and still post this stuff signifies that, like, it's really not as terrible a crisis as it possibly could have been. And if anything comes out of it, hopefully it will be that people understand, one, how quickly a huge crisis like this can just sweep the entire country, and two, how just utterly unprepared most people are for it. Okay, like it's tough when the stores are out of food and out of toilet paper, and you can't buy bullets online anymore because they're all out of stock. Like, that's tough. Okay, the power's still going and the water's still going. So just instead of saying how, oh, I wish I never took for granted, and the warmth of a warm cup of coffee, or the embrace of a friend, or the the laughter at the movie theater, like, try and be realistic about it, all right? Like, the power and the water's off. What are you going to do if the electricity stops working and the fucking water stops running, okay? So, as far as lessons to learn from this, that's hopefully one that a lot of people should learn, okay? Like, I mean, you got to be prepared, and being prepared is a lot more involved than a lot of people want give it credit for. So yeah, the welding school is closed. Obviously, I got nothing better to do but sit here and rant and listen to Primus and eat goat chops. But we'll get through it. But don't do anything rash as far as like radically altering your political beliefs and supporting people who want to take these short-term measures that make them look good but cause a lot of long-term problems. Okay, government never gives back rights when they take them. Okay, and like, we got governors and mayors and stuff telling people they need to close their business down and that people need to stay home, and you're going to get fined if you're out for no reason and stuff like that. Like if you're not an essential employee, this. So we have everybody going along with the government telling people who can stay home, who can keep their business open, who's essential, who's not essential. And I think that's a little dangerous. And the reason why it's kind of a weird circumstance is because, like, I can sit here and say that's dangerous. I don't like maybe some of the long term effects that'll come out with that, which I think is a legitimate concern. But like, short of just voicing that opinion, there's really not a whole lot to do about it. Like how much sense would it make for me, like in protest of that, to like go around in a big group with all two of my friends, or like go out to the movies and do all this. Like there's not a real way to oppose it that doesn't. One, just make you look like an asshole, and two, that could actually result in the spreading of this. So it's a weird situation, okay? And governments historically have always have taken advantage of situations like this in order to use it as a power grab. So don't give them what they didn't have before, okay? Because they're not going to let it go. All right, we're going to have the Patriot Act 2 or something like that, or 3 or 4. Which one are we up to now? But anyway, just be careful. Think long term. It's scary, but just try and be as prepared as you can, and try to just like have the foresight to not like elect anybody who's gonna ruin the country for your children. Okay, that's all I got for now. I'm gonna get back to doing some stuff, and Primus sucks.